So welcome to this week's episode of Leadership Soundbites with Roko and Michelle and our very, 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 very special guest, Gina Temple. So I'm going to read this because she's been in healthcare for just a minute. So she's a leader within healthcare. It's spanned over 30-year career from a CNO, which is when I met you, Gina, working for Sutter Auburn Faith, and I'll say that, to a statewide COO, to a hospital CEO. So your leadership journey and that who you are is nothing short of incredible. And Roko and I have been blessed to sit back and watch it all unfold. Super proud of you, super excited to be in the room with you today. So today's topic is on the power of principles. I'm going to kick us off with a quote. And as people know, there's going to be a few other quotes that get woven into our conversation from today. So the one that I'm going to kick us off with is MacArthur. And a true leader has the confidence to stand alone, the courage to make tough decisions, and the compassion to listen to the needs of others. So when I think about principles, and when I think about, and it brings me back to another, I think it was ethical leadership that I had a podcast with Nikhil. It literally is that stuff. It's that framework, that guide that keeps you moving and bouncing decisions, things that you're up against off of. And I think one of the more challenging aspects in leadership, and we kind of touched on it before we kicked off, is the higher up you go, or the closer you get to what your aspiration is as far as your leadership journey, the stakes get higher. And I think it's even more challenging to stay the course of what those principles are. But frickin' rewarding is all get up when I find leaders who stay that course. So anyway, that's my perspective. Gina, what's on your mind?
Well, first of all, I would like to say thank you so much, Michelle and Roko, for having me on today. And whenever we spoke earlier about leadership principles, really it is something that just is very important to me. And so any way that I can continue to give back to executives, I want to do so. And I was thinking about this topic, and a quote came to mind, which may surprise the audience, but it really reflects on William Shakespeare's Hamlet. And it says, "To thy own self be true." And I do live by that every day. And at the base of that quote, it really says to me and speaks to me, don't go against your true nature. Stay true to your true north. And, I tell folks that report to me frequently, whenever I go to bed every night, I reflect on the leader I was that day. And I want to feel good about the leadership I provided, the support, the guidance, compassion, empathy. And that's why I think it's so important that we continue to talk about the principles of leadership and not just talk about it, but how are we implementing that and making ourselves not just great leaders, but great people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So first, let me say you are leadership extraordinaire. You are the definition of good to great. And I'm so excited that you're here with us today talking about this topic.
Thank you.
My first question for you, because I had the great pleasure of working with you for many years, is, so what are your key principles, those foundational behaviors that have kept you grounded and literally through your journey kept you as one of the great leaders that people flock to you, want to work for you, remember you as when they think of what a great leader is? What were some of those principles?
Yeah, well, I was reflecting on those principles, and I could probably give you 110, but I pulled back. And I actually have 7 top principles that guide me and have guided me through the past 30 years, working as a floor nurse, a charge nurse, all the way to working again as a CEO of a hospital. But first and foremost, integrity. And it goes back to that moral character and being yourself and being true to those moral characters and ethical characteristics that you hope that not only you, your family, your coworkers all abide by and espouse. Second thing is a true respect and love for others. But that respect for others and knowing that everyone brings value to the conversation and to the organization. I would say number 3, very simply put, it's honesty. What you say, you will do. Number 4, accountability.
You want to say that again? Is that 4, 4A, 4B, and 4C?
Number 4. Number 5 goes back to justice/fairness. Number 6 is compassion for your brothers and sisters. And number 7, work ethic. I know that might kind of surprise folks, but showing up to work, being present when you're present, and just giving it your all during that work hour space is just very important. And I do think that those 7 principles, as I looked back on my career, those are 7 principles that have really helped me. But I do divide those because I have my leadership principles, and then I have what I call my operational elements. And whenever I stand in front of folks and I continue as a CEO even to teach leader as coach, Roko, you'd be proud of me. I still go back to those operational elements, which are accountability, discipline, and focus. So I stratify those leadership principles again from the operational elements.
Love it. When have you been challenged? And you don't have to give us the specifics of the challenge, but how have those principles helped you through those challenging moments of your career?
Yeah, well, thank you again. Thank you for asking these tough questions because, the audience that's listening in, they're probably reflecting on 3 that happened to them a month ago or within the last month. And, I use those same principles, not just at work, but at home, whenever you're out and about in your community, going to church, going to a basketball game. Again, I always say, give yourself time to pause, never be afraid of silence, because we are all going to be challenged. Our ethical compass will be challenged. Give yourself grace and time. And one of the things I've learned is it's never too late. So I may say, tell someone, you know what, let me think about that tonight. I'll get back to you by noon tomorrow. So that way you can reflect on it. Don't put yourself into a corner where you have to respond immediately. And again, different folks work in different manners, but I always give myself grace when you have that time.
It's interesting, Gina, when you say that, is I think about your rapid fire during the day. I think about myself too. And what I like to do is pose questions to myself at night before I go to bed and let my subconscious process that crap too. And I say that because in the moment you could not be, especially if you're under stress, your brain is not firing on all cylinders, right? The creative learning centers of your brain are not working. You're literally stepping into, there's a tiger about to eat me mode, right? Survivor mode. And I think a lot of times when I heard, Roko, the question that you asked, and I think about leaders, is my first response is listen to your gut. What is your gut telling you? And if you're in survival, flight or fight mode, you can't hear your gut, right? Because all you want to do is run, get out of whatever it is. And I think part of it, I love the idea that you said, Gina, is pause. Give yourself time to think. You don't have to be comfortable with the silence. You don't have to have an answer right now. And there's so much truth in that, so that you can at least remove yourself from whatever this situation is and have a moment to breathe and pause. Yeah.
Well, thank you for that. And working as a chief nurse officer in the past, there's sometimes you have to make a decision for safety.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, I tell folks all the time, leadership is about making decisions. And, something I've learned working with Michelle and Roko and other lean experts, sometimes it's going to be a bad decision. And if it is, one of the lean principles, if you're going to fail fast, brush yourself off, be accountable to that decision, and then, get your stakeholders together as quickly as possible. You select that next path and you go. But again, give yourself grace, knowing that it's always going to be coming from a good place, and you're all right.
Yeah, that, I agree with everything you said about the pause, Michelle, because the lizard brain, as soon as she said it, it was like, you're stopping the lizard brain, and allowing yourself to really, pull in those foundational behaviors that are necessary to think through those challenges in a meaningful way. And again, the pace of it, giving yourself grace. We are our biggest critics. And and it's easy to spiral down. And if you're a leader who has to keep the motivation of the team going through a challenging time, if you're spiraling, chaos will ensue. So being able to give yourself grace, but then immediately get into that reflection so that you can figure out what's the next step. If this wasn't the right step, what is the next step?
You know, it's interesting you said that, Roko. I think back to stuff that challenges that I've gone through in the last 2 or 3 months, right? There's something in the universe happening. I've talked to way too many people that have been gone through crap in the last 2 to 3 months. But I think about it, and I think about conversations with you and I, right? And part of it too is, who's your sounding board? You know, so part of it with maintaining principles, right? And I think about an activity that I went through. There was some leadership development course that was happening. Who's on your personal board? Right? And so who are those people that you know that you can tap into to where you can stay true to yourself, that can give you another perspective, that literally you can play out the different scenarios and what's going on. And again, I'm going to go back to listen to your gut, because when you land on the one that makes sense for you in this situation, it's like locking those pieces in. I mean, you just know it's the right thing.
Yeah. So that sounds like a good question for you, Gina, right? Because leadership can be lonely. You know, when you're on a, you know, at the team level, you have your peers to, you know, vent to, collaborate with. But when you step into a leadership role, sometimes it can be lonely. So who is that sounding board for you? And what would you offer for other leaders who are starting out?
Yeah, well, again, I think it's a great question, and I will confirm it is lonely at the top.
Yeah. Yes.
I will confirm that. But I will tell you, a few folks do come to mind, and I would say I'm very blessed because I married my best friend. My husband is a retired military officer, and just the military training and the leadership training that he underwent, he's just always been my rock and my sounding board. I would also say just surrounding yourself with folks along the journey. And Roko knows, because I have her on my favorite dial. It has been frequently over the years since Roko and I have worked together, that I have bounced ideas off of her, or even ethical dilemmas that I was facing, because it's so important to surround yourself with folks who are like-minded, who you admire and you respect. And then I would also say, for me, I've been very blessed to have wonderful supervisors. Folks like Jeff Sesney, Jill Ragsdale. I mean, I could go on and on. Of folks that I still cherish and maintain those relationships with, so that I can have folks that I can continue to reach out to and just bounce ideas and concepts and dilemmas off of.
You know, what's funny is, not funny, haha, but when you were talking about that, I think the other part of it, because Roko's been that for me, as well as some other leaders, when you go through some challenging things, people that are also going to hold the frickin' mirror up.
Oh, yeah.
You know, that go, you know what? This is probably not a good path for you. I'm not sure that you were your best self in that moment, you know? And then brainstorm some ways, to your point, Gina, that we can go back and say, okay, what does the path back into it look like, to where you can own it? Because part of those principles, right, is as a leader, we're going to own that stuff and then step back into it. Yeah. No, I love that.
And I will share one occasion, and this is why I've continued to reach out to Roko, because I will tell you, as a leader, it's so important to surround yourself with folks who are not yes men and women. Just to your point, Michelle, I'll never forget one time we were up against, well, at that point I was responsible for 9 hospitals, and I was feeling the pressure on how to integrate horizontal and vertical type of departments within that footprint. And I remember Roko, you know, she called it out, and she said, patience. Gina, patience is absolutely needed in this case, because in Lean we say go slow to go fast. And Roko was absolutely right. Because if you try to, the speed of change can be overwhelming. And so it's so important to have a partner by your side, like Roko, like Michelle, or other folks. I'm sure in the audience, I have folks that are coming to mind as well. To your point, Michelle, are going to tell you the truth no matter what.
Yeah.
So I want to build on that. A lot of what we've said has your reflection, and it's a muscle that you use and have used ever since I've known you. And I love it about you that you are open and willing to reflect, and turn that mirror to yourself. So I know offline you shared with us a quote that had to do with reflection and improving yourself. So I just want you to have an opportunity to share that, because I think that lends itself to the power behind principles.
Well, the one that we talked about, to thine own self be true. Again, whenever I reflected on that, I just think it's so important that every day that we stay grounded to that true north. And it also reminds me of other different leadership principles. I'm a big fan of Indra Nooyi.
Yes.
And I follow her on LinkedIn, but again, she was the CEO of Pepsi Cola. And she says that she is a leader who just happened to be a woman. And I just think her character just shines through. But one of the quotes that she says is, if you want to improve the organization, you have to improve yourself, and the organization gets pulled up with you. And that is so extraordinarily powerful. And we've seen what good leaders can do. I'll give the example of Sarah Crevens, who was the president of Sutter Health for several years. The way in which she led with integrity and grace was just phenomenal. You wanted to be a part of that because it was something special. Again, I was very blessed to be a trauma nurse at Baptist Hospital in Pensacola, Florida, whenever Quint Studer was the CEO.
Oh, wow.
And that was one of my epiphanies, that I wanted to start to study leadership in greater detail, because he created an environment where, as a frontline staff, I didn't want to work in any other trauma center. So, I've just been so blessed to be at the right place at the right time, and got to work under strong leaders to witness organizational change that has been internationally recognized. And so at the root of it, again, I feel like I'm a very blessed person. I've had some extraordinary experiences, and I just feel just really so thankful that people have trusted in me over the years to be their leader. And it's a humbling experience, and something that I have just much gratitude for.
Yeah, I love that. You were saying that quote. Sorry, Michelle.
No, you're fine, Roko. You go.
I know. When you were saying that quote, though, it was reminding me of when Michelle and I were teaching A3 thinking, and we did an exercise with the groups. We would always start with, get clarity around yourself, then go to the smaller group, which was your team, then go to the larger group, which is the organization. And as you were reading that quote, that visual was coming to mind and it goes back to growth starts with you. And as you grow, you can impact others around you, which will ultimately impact the organization. And with that, I'll zip it and let you go, Michelle.
I freaking forgot about that. I seriously forgot about that. And when you said it, I'm like, oh my God, that's right. It's like you got to ready yourself to be able to be with your team, ready the team. So it was the table group activities that they would do to be able to report out to the larger room. And I totally forgot about that. Sorry, Margie. Just now. But no, what came to mind for me, Gina, when you were talking is the ability. So the quote around that she said around, you pull the organization up with you. There's so much, literally had a visual that and other leaders that come to mind that I didn't personally work with, but I read about, because you're reading about so much stuff, but it falls on leadership. So as leadership goes, so does the rest of the organization for the most part. So it's like, it is a huge responsibility. And that being said about the huge responsibility, I think I'm going to say this and you can frickin' challenge me if you want to. I think what happens is it's so much easier if they just start being true to themselves to be a great leader versus stepping into what you believe it, air quote, should be, right? If we can just be us, then that's going to shine through. It's going to attract people. It's going to, you still have to hold people accountable and set expectations but it's the whole switch from this fear-based top-down organization that stifles creativity and people's thinking to one that it's like, we're all on the same team. We've all got the same skin in the game. Let's do amazing things. And you tap into what everybody brings to the table every day. So I think there's so much power in principles and being true to who you are, the authenticity piece that lends itself to being an amazing leader because you're you.
Yeah. So can I want to ask another question then in
Really?
relation to that, Michelle. Because here's why. Because I know when Gina and I were at Sutter Auburn Faith, and we were kicking off strategy deployment and daily engagement. Those were challenging times because we were pushing people out of their comfort zone. And when you think about principles and behaviors, if you're not real clear on them or you're not aligned to them. So I want to get your perspective on that, because you have your core values have remained the same. Those principles have remained the same for you throughout your career, Gina. So how do you use that to align yourself to the organization? Because when there's a misalignment, things can go awry, right? So how has that helped you or guide you in your alignment?
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, it really was an evolution. I remember studying at the PhD level leadership ideologies and theories, and there were three that really resonated with me, which would be servant leadership. Of course, Robert Greenleaf talks about that. And that's something that I believe, even as a charge nurse, that is something that was very important to me. And then when I started studying, Bass and Burns transformational leadership. So again, there goes that moral character that gets people to be able to achieve greater results than they ever thought possible. But the humdinger for me was whenever I realized that without transactional leadership and that lean ideology, that's what really sets the clarity. And to be clear is to be kind in our business, as leaders. And so that's where I started really to embrace lean. And especially, Roko, as you and I went through that journey, lean really helped to have that clarity. Here's our vision. Here's where we're going. Here's the time frame. Who's responsible for what? And making that visible so that we all knew, were we succeeding? Were we having some gaps in that? And if we did have gaps, how do we rally around each other for success? And really, that really was that evolution, because servant leadership, transformational leadership alone, I do believe you've got to have that the structure that comes with the transactional and the leadership that goes along with the lean principles and daily engagement systems. And so I believe that's where the magic really happens, and it helps us all to stay true to ourselves. But also it helps us to pick one another up when needed. Right now, it won't surprise you, I'm constantly reading, and one of the books I'm reading right now that I really am enjoying, it's called Extreme Ownership, and it was written by 2 Navy SEALs. And it talks about, in the good times, it's so easy to be like, yay, we won. But whenever you make a decision, and again, it turns out to not be the best decision in the moment, it really talks about how do you take ownership for that in a way that really lifts the whole organization up, or your whole squadron, in their case, up to a beautiful level. And so I think it does come back to, again, accountability, discipline, and focus. And that's really what every leader needs, because if you have a strong moral foundation, I still feel like it's nothing if you can't execute upon that.
You know, what came to mind for me, Gina, when you're talking is my brain's navigating through different stuff as I'm listening, is Tylenol. When that whole thing, and I'm going to take us back a few decades, right? The poisoning, whatever it was in the Tylenol thing, that organization had the opportunity to try and cover it up like other organizations may have done in the past, but that's not what they did. To your point, they stepped in, they owned it, they, you know, whatever it was, that was not the intent. And they're still around today because of it. And I think that's part of it too, is what does that ownership look like? Because we're perfectly imperfect beings. You know, as long as we're well-intentioned, okay, then you can say, you know what, that is not what we thought was going to happen. That is not what we planned for. And I think there's an opportunity to step in, as scary as it is, to say, you know what, I'm going to own this thing, whatever it is. And oh, by the way, what's the path to where we can get out of it and get back on the right track and not repeat what just happened? So anyway, I know I took us on a complete, but that's what came to mind for me when you were talking, because it's in those moments that we step in and step up. And I think that's the power and the principles is stay the course, even though it's scary. And it's not about being perfect. It's about being intentional and guided and staying true to that, like your, you know, lean management system and the transactions in that is grounded in respect for people. And it's grounded in, you know, making sure that the fingerprints of others is on thinking, that the problem solving is engaging the people where the information is and people doing the work, which again is respect for people. And then it's about creating a space to where people don't have a fear of raising the flag and saying, Houston, we got a problem. Yeah. So anyway, that's what comes to mind for me.
And, you know, I've always, you know, learned as well. I remember I was working with an executive who had, you know, worked with one of the top, you know, healthcare systems in America. And, you know, she told me, she said, I learned quickly on that I would never be the smartest person around the table. And what I've learned in my career is, again, surround yourself with very intelligent, passionate, ethical people. And that just raises us all up to another level, because you're never going to be an expert in everything. And so that's why staying true to yourself, coming from a humble place, I believe really keeps you out of trouble, to be fair, as well. Listen. And again, you know, some of the best relationships that I have now are whenever, again, I had to raise my hand and say, I need help. I thought this was going to go this way, but, you know, we're having some digression. How can you help? Those have been good. And then I would say other relationships where, you know, I've come into organizations that were turnarounds, had to have crucial conversations with folks to go back and say, I know in the past the answer was yes, but the answer is no, and here's why. And of course, it was heated at that time, but I look back, you know, 3 months later, 6 months later, a year later, these are the folks that I can call on now for anything, because they understood the why. And again, they may not have liked it in the moment, but again, quickly understood that I was a leader who was going to keep my principles, ethics, compliance, without hesitation or reservation.
And it wasn't personal.
That's absolutely right.
And it wasn't personal. Yeah. I love that. I appreciate this time. What I would love to do, I mean, more than what you know, so we'll figure out a way so you know how much we appreciate this time. I would love for you to share one or two things. Roko brought us into two things that you would love people to walk away with around the topic of the power of principles.
Well, you know, I'm still going to reflect back again to thine own self be true. I want to just circle back to that. I think it's just so incredibly important to find who you are. Be comfortable with you. And that has to be your guiding principle, that you maintain and you feel good about every day, every night when you put your head on your pillow. You feel good about the leader that you are. And one of the things I often reflect on is Warren Bennis. He stated, leadership is the capacity to translate vision into reality. And I think when you have both, that the technical aspect of leadership and that moral compass, that's where, you know, these long, beautiful careers come into play, where you can truly have it all. Be good to yourself and have a wonderful career, be a wonderful mother, a wonderful employee, and a wonderful boss, all along the way.
Thank you. I love that. Roko, what's on your mind?
Yeah, I can't say more than what Gina just said. She said it all. I think what stood out to me, though, you know, for leaders who are listening, the power behind them is it will help you get through the good times as well as get through the challenging times. And it will help you continue to grow and challenge yourself through all of those times.
Yeah, thank you. I think what comes to mind when I think about it, because Gina, to your point, you've been in, your career in healthcare for 30 years. And, to people listening, if you haven't thought about what are my principles, right? What are my principles? What are the values? What are my principles? It's a really powerful activity, an exercise to go through, to sit down and think about what it is. I remember, what is your purpose in life? All those things I think help around this topic of the power in it, because then you have clarity around what those guardrails are, right? That you're moving forward with. And then bottom frickin' line, listen to your gut, because it will guide you, but listen to your gut. I appreciate this time. This has been Leadership Soundbites with Roko and Michelle and our very special guest, Gina Temple. Until next time. And oh, by the way, Gina, you were talking about listening. Gina is going to come back for a part 2. So we're super freaking excited about that. So part 2 will happen. But until next time, Roko, Michelle, and Gina, and thank you very much.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.